Rules of Order, good for writers and the Supreme Court. That's why I chose the song most of us remember from grade school to introduce this podcast. So let's continue. I've found no writing coach seminars talking about writing cornerstone issues, namely a major writing cornerstone needed for all authors. And that cornerstone consists of three pieces: grammar, syntax, and semantics. I guess these writing coaches think all would-be authors and writers remember them from their school days. However, most mindset and mind shift self-help books say you must master and then keep reviewing enough of the fundamentals of anything you want to become. So I will mention enough about grammar to give a review that you can build on if you wish. Here's a good working definition of grammar that I found on the internet. Put simply, grammar is the umbrella term that includes syntax and semantics. Syntax is the set of rules needed to ensure a sentence is grammatically correct. Semantics is how one's lexicon or vocabulary, plus grammatical structure, tone, and other elements of a sentence coalesce to communicate its meaning. And here's a brief review of the two parts of speech categories: working words, which are nouns, pronouns, verbs, adverbs, and adjectives, and functional words, which are conjunctions, prepositions, articles, determiners, and expletives. Function words are sometimes called glue words because they hold all the function words together to give the correct meaning to the sentence. Fiction writers are allowed more leeway than technical and non-fiction writers. For example, novelists must use grammar correctly enough not to offend readers, but they also have to make their writing entertaining and engaging for the audience. I will mention two grammar reference books I own: Complete English Grammar Rules, published by Farlex International, and The Handbook for Writers, published by Simon & Schuster. They, like just about all grammar books, emphasize studying the rules for verbs in particular, because verbs are the engines of sentences and have the most complexity. Verbs have gerunds, infinitives, and participles associated with them. Grammar books give all the rules for parsing verbs. And here's a definition of parsing: to divide something, like a sentence or a noun or a verb, into grammatical parts and identify the parts and the relations to other items by stating the part of speech and explaining it in a very detailed way. Please note that we parse verbs, decline nouns, and compare adjective forms. And we diagram sentences. The traditional method is what you probably learned in grade school. You divide a sentence horizontally into subject and predicate and keep subdividing each. The newer vertical method is called X-bar theory. Though the Writing Coach videos don't talk about any of this, the better books telling about what it takes to be a successful writer do. You might want to get a copy of Strunk and White's classic, The Elements of Style, which is a wonderful primer on good writing. And Steven Pinker's A Sense of Style is a more contemporary version of it. And now, let's turn to the rules of order for the Supreme Court, which is, of course, the Constitution. The Supreme Court has been in lots of news stories recently, all the way from throwing out Roe versus Wade to keeping Donald Trump on some ballots, or from accepting gifts from friends to revising their rules of ethics. Well, no matter what, the Supreme Court is bigger than those people wearing the black robes. And it behooves each citizen to have a working knowledge of the U.S. Constitution. Most of us studied it in a civics class long ago, and a refresher might help. I came across the book, How to Interpret the Constitution, written by Harvard professor Cass Sunstein, published in 2023. It's about 200 pages and is clearly written, but readers must know something about constitutional terminology as well as current controversies ahead of time. I'll give enough of a summary to help you get started. So here goes. Interpreting the Constitution changes over time because the United States is a deliberative democracy that will not tolerate a caste social structure. And that means we the people and our elected representatives are supposed to debate issues before making decisions that everyone must abide by. And the Supreme Court is supposed to be independent from the short-term whims of politics. The Constitution contains some fixed points, but others are provisional and open to interpretation. Interpreting the Constitution is often subjective, and therein lies the problem. Whose interpretation is the best? There are many interpretations to consider. Textualists insist on adhering to the actual words in the Constitution, but their meanings change from one generation to the next. Originalists, also known as traditionalists, interpret the Constitution according to what the framers wanted or intended for protecting democracy. But what if, over time, the morals of society change, leading to originalist intentions that are now faulty? The book gives this example. 20th century judicial scholar John Rawls talks about how the veil of ignorance demands we define justice as fairness, which supersedes common good utilitarianism. So the book recommends that the best way to interpret the Constitution is via reflective equilibrium. The issues are thoroughly debated and thought about before reaching a decision. That's the reflective piece. And the decisions should cause moral and political judgments to change gradually, continuously. That is the equilibrium piece. And here's the last paragraph of the book. We post the sign, no algorithms here. As we live it, constitutional law is not a matter for deduction. It is rooted in a common law process, one of case-by-case decision-making in which identifiable moral aspirations and commitments play a central role, in which defining constitutional rulings are animated by an insistence on deliberative democracy and the anti-caste principle. We could do a lot worse. We cannot do a lot better. Well, in a previous podcast, I gave the answer to a Supreme Court question I asked ChatGPT. Well, I will end this podcast with ChatGPT's answer to this question. What are the grammatical details for parsing a verb? Here's the answer. The grammatical details for parsing a verb involve identifying the subject and predicate in a sentence, understanding verb tense, recognizing different parts of speech like nouns and adjectives and adverbs, analyzing word order, and determining clauses within the sentence. Parsing a verb includes looking at its transitivity, basic constituents it takes in a sentence, and identifying different clauses associated with it. ChatGPT also provided links to articles that expanded these details further. So I'll end this podcast here.